Hey guys, what is up? AwesomeTheSauce here. Hope you guys are having a great day and welcome to another epic Laboria video. Today, I'm doing a much requested thing. I am going to be ranking every school based on the spells that they got in test round. But basically, every school got 3 conditionals and a bunch of 3 pip utilities. And I thought, you know, if I look at them as a whole, what school came out on top? What school got shafted? So without further ado, let's get right into it. Starting at the very bottom. I think to the surprise of nobody, I am putting Storm at the very bottom because honestly, I do think that they got shafted. Now, very unfortunately, I think for Storm, they designed a lot of these 3-pip spells like Energy Transfer, Reap the Whirlwind, Oni's Attrition, Jin's Restoration. They made those to counter fire. That's basically what the whole point of the spells and how they're designed is, right? The fire ones are supposed to really be anti-shield, so they're really good against ice. And the Storm ones are supposed to be really anti-overtime, so they're really good against fire. But the problem with being good against overtimes is that any overtime related mechanic with these new spells anyways isn't really as good as the other one. Let's say you clear an overtime to make a heal overtime on yourself, right? Like a Jin's Restoration, right? You would think, oh, you're destroying someone's heal, you're healing for yourself, you're clearing up to 3, like that's gotta be good, right? The problem is you don't make multiple overtime heals. So when you use Jin's Restoration, unless you already have an overtime heal on you, you can never directly combo into a Thundering Jin. You need to cast like a Sprite, you need to cast like, I don't know, a Healing Current maybe with the new overtime mechanic. It's very hard to set that up. I don't honestly mind the other ones because they do get they do get rid of like damage overtimes and either blade you or weakness. It's not like it's a bad utility, but at the end of the day, it's not like you could actually just do what the spell does in 2 turns without really using pips. You could literally triage into a blade and you could triage into a weakness. Now, as far as the other spells, right? I mean, we talked about Jin. I do think Turmoil Oni is a very good spell. Yes, it seems like it's hard to set up, especially because, you know, again, the Oni's Attrition spell, you need an overtime on you to set up weaknesses. And it's just very hard to see yourself really making multiple weaknesses at any given point, right? It's very hard, I think, to see yourself doing that. Luckily, in this test ROM update, you could actually train a new spell called Threefold Fever from my mans, you feel me? All you need is infection and then you can learn this, and basically what it does in PvP anyways, it gives your opponent 3 infections, and if they can't heal, it's very hard for them to do anything about this. So it's definitely a very usable spell, so at least, you know, there's something redeeming. I do think Scion is also very good. I mean, all you really need to do is just get a bunch of blades on you. Even with blade removal being a part of the other schools like toolkit, it is very easy just to put on like an elemental blade and then just get ready to do another blade and you're good. Or maybe even a spirit blade into like a storm beetle, right? I think Storm is saved a lot more by the actual damage on the spells than it is by the utilities. So that is something that Storm has to think about. Let's move on to number 6 in terms of the best schools in this Laboria spell update thing in test. Let's get into number 6. I think following the same trend as Storm, the reason I've ranked Life so low on this list is because a lot of their 3-pip utilities are based again on overtimes, but this time it's actually almost worse in some ways. Whereas Storm converts overtimes into other things, Life actually converts other things into overtime, so it is a little bit different, and they tend to be heal overtime. Now, I will say this, what I really like about these spells is that they do give Life a much needed defense against trap stacking. Like, Tranquility is really good. It's not as good, in my opinion, for the heal. Even if you, let's say you clear 3 traps and get a 5-round heal, that's what that would do if you clear 3 traps. Even if you were to do that, I think the big part of it isn't really the heal. It's the fact that you're getting rid of 3 traps, and maybe you could set up with that heal for, you know, maybe a Scion or something. So Tranquility is really good, but the other ones, I don't know. I'm not really as sure, because like this one, for example, it literally converts an overtime on you into just a heal, which again, it's just a 3-round heal. It's barely going to be useful unless you have multiple overtimes on you, and unless someone's really setting up for like, I don't know, like a Scion of Fire or something, I guess, you won't really see yourself dealing with multiple overtimes, in my opinion. And again, Jin's Affliction, right? Like, it turns it into like an overtime on your opponent that you might be able to detonate. Again, it might seem good, but it's really not that good, because you might as well just triage at that point, unless you can clearly set up for a Jin out of the spell. It's supposed to help you set up for the Jin. I like Oni's naturalism because, yeah, it's very nice. You know, you convert traps into blades. I think this one's probably the best one for life. Now, I will say this. I think the Oni 3-pip spell goes very well with this. If someone's trap stacking you, you can literally just turn them into blades and get ready to do a massive hit. So I do like the Oni, but again, I think the Jin, it's just very, very hard to see myself setting 2 damage overtimes on my opponent, especially when you consider the fact that you need 9 pips after you set up the damage overtimes. This is almost exclusively gonna be usable when you have like a mastery amulet where you can do cheap overtimes. Maybe like a fire mastery. I don't know if that would even work mildly, but I do think that's kind of the thing that's happening here. It's very hard to set up overtimes on a life. I do like Scion of Life. I don't mind it. I think, you know, you can literally just double Sprite and you're ready to do it. You don't really need other utilities to do it. So again, there is something that's redeemed here. I will say this. I think Scion of Life is actually easier to set up for life than Storm, and I also do think that Primal Oni is very easy to set up for life, and unlike Scion of Storm, it's so pip efficient that you can just use it a lot in one game. So I think life barely edges out Storm in terms of utility. Not by much, not by much, I'm not gonna lie to you. I think this might be a little bit of a surprise entry, but I think number 5 in terms of the best spells that every school got is Fire. And I don't think it's for the reason a lot of people think. I'll be honest, I think some of these spells are really, really good. I think something that can clear shields on your opponent and turn them into overtimes without even using any traps, anything else, that's a really cool concept. I also think Backfire is really nice, just like life. You have a very easy, intuitive anti-trap maneuver. You actually have 2 of them on a fire. I think Jin's reversal is even better because you literally turn traps on you into traps that you can use, like OT traps, which are, it's really nice. I think my problem is that when you look at the actual conditionals, right, there seems to be a problem here. They're all over the place. There's very little synergy. I think a hallmark of a good school in this update is that they can set up for multiple conditionals at once, and I think almost by definition, Fire struggles with that. You could theoretically do overtimes on your opponent and heals on yourself by linking. I do think that is something that you could theoretically do, but to have a deck that can give you 2 links, an Oni, and a Scion, it's the synergy just isn't as there, I think. Not to mention the fact that if you choose to go for the overtime route, you pretty much do not really give yourself the ability to go for a trap-based conditional. It's really strange. Like, you know, like Fire is a school of fuel. Fire is a school of, like, you know, multiple OT traps. And yet it is clearly the overtime school as well. So it's very hard, I think, to organize your deck. I think what's going to happen, probably for most people, is that they're going to have to choose. They're going to have to choose whether they want to set up for a Scion or whether they want to set up for a Jin. And I think those 2 are mutually exclusive, which is why I think the spells conflict enough with each other that I just don't think Fire came out on top as much as it could. No hate on Fire. I think Fire is going to be a ton of fun to play on. I just think there's a little less synergy than I would have liked. Let's move on to number 4 in terms of the Lemuria Test Realm spell. I'm putting Balance at number 4, and it's not because they're bad. It's just because the other ones are just really good, and that's just what it is, man. I think Balance got niced in this update. I'm telling y'all, it got nice. I'm really happy with what they did with Balance. I think the 2 best spells for Balance in terms of the utilities anyways is just the one that just clears off traps on you and just clears off blades on your opponent. We're talking about Riding the Scales and Eye of Vigilance. I'm very excited to use these in Test Realm tonight because now they actually fix these, so they do what the card does. Before, it used to be removing your own shields and stuff. It wasn't as fun to use. Now, if they work as intended, these are game changers. 1, you can set up for off-school hits like Hydra with these, so there's already like a lot of synergy with other spells that you have. Anybody who's trying to do a shield-based conditional, a trap-based conditional, a weakness-based conditional, or a blade-based conditional, you have an answer to all of them with just 2 spells. So Balance has an entire level of counterplay that no other school does. I think Oni's Shadow is just a creative ass spell. It gives you a lot to work with. It gives you a lot to like you know, you can do a lot with like Dark Nova. You can do Oni, obviously. There's a lot of little things you can do there. And I think Jin's Fortune's kind of cool. It just swaps you know, it's like a triage and a I guess a Snowdrift, I guess, at the same time. Obviously you don't steal the heal, and you know, it's just like a little reversal type thing. It's not terrible. I think it's very situational, but it is good. It's good to have something OT related on a Balance as well. I think what I really like is that if you carry Tribunal and Hydra, you can literally set up for very cheap hits that do every school of damage. So it's going to be very hard to defend, especially when you can clear off the off-school shields. You have ways to set up Tribunal and Hydra that it's magnificent. You can actually see balance being a multi-school hit. So that's what I love about the new Oni and Hydra combined. And when you're giving your opponent all these pips with Eye of Vigilance and Riding the Scales, you have an amazing, amazing Scion that does a lot of damage as well. I think the only thing that I don't see myself using as much on a balance is the Dust Storm Jin. You need to have 2 matching overtimes on either you or your opponent to set this up. That means you need 2 Availing Hands, which would require max pips to try to do. Or you need 2 overtimes, like 2 Steel Giants maybe, or you somehow manage to use 2 different utilities that give... If you're figuring out how complicated this is, it's because it is very complicated. I just don't see myself using this. Maybe this is a good spell. I don't know. I think it's bad. Let's move on to number 3 in terms of the Lemuria Test Realm spells. Guys, this was a hard decision for me to make, but I decided to put Death at number 3 on this tier list of Lemuria Test Realm spells. And this is a very hard one. The reason they're not higher up is because I think Death is still relatively weak, and they do need an anti-trap counter. Unlike a lot of the schools that we've seen so far, they do not have one in terms of the spells that they're given. All of these are very, very nice. Jin's Larceny literally makes your opponent's blades into blades for you. Very, very nice anti-blade tool. And the fact that you can turn blades into weaknesses, you can turn heals that your opponent does into weaknesses, and you can even turn heals that your opponent does into shields. You do have a lot of counterplay when it comes to overtime-based strategies, but as I said, those aren't as good necessarily. So I would say the ones that really shine are the anti-blade tools. I see Death being good if you can run a mastery that can counter traps, so maybe something like a Life Mastery, maybe a Balance Mastery. But the reason why I put it above Balance is because while Balance gives your opponent pips, these debuffs are massive. Like, the swing from having 3 blades to 3 weaknesses is absolutely crazy. The swing that you have from having 3 blades to your opponent having blades, absolutely huge. So I feel like the amount of swinginess that Death has with some of these, that's what puts them on top. I think giving your opponent pips is a trade-off, whereas giving your opponent weaknesses to have blades is amazing for Death. I also will say that they have very easy setups for all of their conditionals. I think putting 4 weaknesses on is very, very easy. There's literally a pet that gives threefold fever. We saw that Dworgen has a trainable one. These are very easy to set up, and if that doesn't work, you can just weakness a little bit if you really need to. Packing infections now is actually just goated. Anything that hits an infections is actually goated now because it sets up for Scion so easily, and it's a gigantic drain. Not to mention the fact that blade stacking is not actually hard for Death because of Dark Pact and Spirit Blade, so this is easy to set up. And shielding is something you naturally do. If you carry some of these, especially against schools that cannot convert your shields into other things, you're easily setting up for a Doom Oni, and this is supposed to become a drain soon. So you have a very, very solid drain. Like 1,000 damage drain for just putting shields on, and you're using shields that you don't even need, actually. If you're using like a spirit shield against a myth, you don't need the life or death shield. So this is a very, very easy spell. It's an easy spell to make. I think shield-based conditionals are the best types of conditionals, and that's another reason why I just put Death way up. I just think that all of their conditionals are super easy to set up. Yes, their utilities might not cover as much ground, especially against traps, but I think the conditionals more than make up for it, especially considering they'll be drained. This might come as a surprise, but I am putting Ice at number 2. Now, here's the thing. I honestly think that Ice has a lot of things, a lot of obstacles now to deal with, but I do think that they came out on top with a lot of these utility spells. I think by far the best, the singular best one that we've seen so far is Wall of Blades, converting your opponent blades into universal shields on yourself. I mean, it's good on any school, but on Ice, when you have like 70 as resist, free shields when your opponent's trying to blade to kill you is demonic. It's insane. And this update really addresses something that Ice has had an issue with, which is when they're maybe trying to frostbite into something, weaknesses are very good, and a double weakness almost shuts out an Ice currently, and now you just don't have to worry about that. Weaknesses on yourself also become shield. And if you don't want to have more shields on you, you could also turn weaknesses on yourself into weaknesses on your opponent. And you have another anti-blade tool that makes blades on your opponent into traps if you're trying to go offense. What I really like about these spells is that there are scenarios where you can turn the same things into either offense or defense. You can turn blades into shields for yourself, or your opponent blades into traps for yourself. And I think that type of flexibility is kind of rare with the other spells. I feel like everyone has one option, Whereas it's very clear that ice has two options against two very specific things, which I think they're things that are used a lot. I think blades and weaknesses are used quite a bit. Again, just like death, not having an anti-trap tool is gonna hurt. So again, I do think ice will have to run a mastery of some sort that has just a school that can do something about traps. Maybe a life mastery so you can heal, so you can get rid of traps on yourself and turn them into blades. A lot of little things that you can do. Now, once again, I do think that the Oni, the Jin, and the Scion are very easy for ice to set up. And yeah, it might be a little easier on a death, but death doesn't have wall of blades, my boy. But yeah, I just think the Scion is just absolutely easy to set up, and it's just a very nice hit. It's much like you'll see Scion used all the time on an ice now. You never used to see the current Scion used, because how often are you above 90% HP, right? Like, this is always a threat now. It's so easy to shield 4 times. I think the Oni is a little bit harder to set up, but I don't think the Jin is. I think putting weaknesses on your opponent, especially with a threefold fever card, I think it's very accessible, especially on a slow playing school like ice. I think that means, as usual, some of our favorite schools, #1, let's talk about it. And of course, Myth is #1 in terms of the Lemuria test run spells. I will not argue with anybody who does not agree with this. I don't know why you would disagree with this. This spell is so damn good. I don't know, like, how, and I know what you guys are thinking. Oh, but isn't Scion an 11 pip one just like that? Here's the thing, right? Myth has so much more damage than ice. You don't need 11 pips. It's just a very accessible, easy spell to use. Put a bunch of shields on yourself, you have a 1600 damage spell for 9 pips. This spell is now a trap-based spell, and literally every utility that Myth has is trap-based. And Oni, we'll not talk about Oni. I think Oni, it's a throwaway spell. Maybe there's some niche strategies where you can use it. It's the only bad part about this update for Myth. Utilities, though, y'all, are absolutely nuts. We have Delusion, which can clear weaknesses on yourself to make traps. You can clear shields to make traps. And you can also clear shields on your opponent to make shields for yourself. That's what the Jin spell is. The only thing in Myth's toolkit that isn't there is an anti-blade tool, and all you need to do is carry Earthquakes inside, and without a Mastery Amulet even needed, you already covered that. So essentially, you are able to cover every single thing that your opponent could do against you. If they want to overtime against you, while I hope they don't do it too stupidly, because you can literally shift it back as well, that's also a thing that Myth has. And that's without even mentioning the minion and the stun plays and the steel pip utility and, you know, the 0 pip minion. The list literally goes on. I think the only thing Myth will struggle with is deck failing, because you're gonna you can easily address anything that's thrown at you. You just have to have the card up. That's gonna be the real skill-based part of Myth. But that's not what this tier list is about. This tier list isn't about PvP. It's about who got the best spells. I think Myth, without dispute, got the best spells. No way I could agree with anyone else who disagrees with that. No way. Yeah, guys, that is my tier list of all the Lemuria test run spells. Let me know in the comments if you agree or not. Let me also know, do you guys want me to break down each spell one by one in a massive ass tier list? I could do that. It would be a long video, but I could try to make that happen for y'all if you're really interested in my opinion on it. Let me know what you guys' thoughts are. Let me know if you agree with the rankings, except for the Myth one. You can't disagree with that. As always, if somebody hasn't told you you're awesome today, they doing something wrong. Drop a like if you enjoyed, leave us a review. I look forward to reading your comments in the comments below. And stay awesome, y'all. And yeah.